Before the sun clears the ridge, you can hear it. A low grinding of stone against stone, coming from every courtyard at once. Barley, going between the millstones. It is the first sound of every morning in this place, and it will not stop until there is flour enough for the day, because in this village nobody has next week's bread. Wood smoke, goats complaining. Somewhere a rooster, and then all the roosters. This is Nazareth, in the hills of Galilee, and the year is somewhere around 20. And the most influential human being who ever lived is somewhere inside that sound, working. Here is the strange thing about this village. No historian of the ancient world ever mentions it. Not one. Flavius Josephus, who wrote more about first-century Galilee than any other surviving author, who commanded troops in this region and names dozens of its towns, never writes the word Nazareth, not once in any of his books. Now, an argument from silence is a weak argument, and we should say so honestly. But when a man catalogues a countryside and leaves a place out, the most reasonable explanation is that there was nothing there worth cataloging. So, a village too small to be written down. And inside it, for roughly 30 years, ordinary days by the thousand, in a town that watched him grow up and thought it knew exactly what he was. Start with the ground. Around the year 20, the emperor in Rome is Tiberius. But Galilee is not a Roman province, and the man whose decisions actually reach this hillside is Herod Antipas, son of Herod the Great, tetrarch of Galilee for more than 40 years. Antipas builds. That is the single fact about him that touches Nazareth. 4 miles north, a walk of about an hour and a half over the ridge, sits Sepphoris, which Antipas has been rebuilding into an administrative center since the beginning of his reign. And in these exact years, around 19 and 20, Antipas is founding an entirely new capital on the shore of the Sea of Galilee and naming it Tiberias, after the emperor. The world around this village is under construction, and a building program on that scale eats skilled hands. It needs men who can cut stone and set beams, and it needs them for years, and the nearest supply is every craftsman's village within a morning's walk. Nazareth is within a morning's walk. Whether a man from this village took that road, no source says. So we hold it as a real possibility, not a fact. The theater there is dated by argument rather than agreement, and likeliest after his youth. Nothing here rests on it. What we can build on is the ground itself. The bedrock of the Nazareth Ridge is a soft limestone. Chalky, workable, easily cut, which is why the village is riddled with rock-hewn cavities, storage silos, cisterns, pits for oil and grain. Excavations in the area of the modern Basilica of the Annunciation have documented first-century domestic remains, and a first-century dwelling excavated under the direction of Yardena Alexandra for the Israel Antiquities Authority, published from 2009, gave us something we had not had before, an actual modest courtyard house of the period in this village. That soft stone is also why the one piece of hard volcanic rock in the whole settlement had to be imported. The hand mill you heard grinding at the top of this, the mill in every courtyard, is basalt, carried in from elsewhere, because the local chalk is far too soft to grind grain against. A poor village buying the one stone it could not quarry because bread required it. How big was it? Scholarly estimates put the population somewhere in the range of 200 to 400 people, with some proposals going as high as 500. Say it as a range, because that is what the evidence supports. 200 to 400. Fewer people than fit in a small school, and we know roughly where the village stopped because of the dead. Jewish purity law required burial outside the inhabited area, and rock-cut tombs of the kokim type, narrow shafts driven into the rock for individual bodies, have been identified around the settlement's edges, which gives us something quietly astonishing as a piece of evidence. In Nazareth, the dead mark the boundary of the living. Walk far enough in any direction, and you reach the tombs, and that is where the village ends. Inside that boundary, there are no paved streets, no public buildings, no wall, no marketplace worth the name. Just paths of packed earth and exposed bedrock winding between clusters of houses, and the houses themselves built of undressed local limestone bedded in mud, with flat roofs of beams and branches and packed clay that had to be re-rolled after every winter. Now watch how a day moves through a place like that, because it doesn't move the way yours does. There is no clock in Nazareth. There is no bell. And the hours these people used were not the hours you use. A day had 12 hours of daylight. Jesus says so himself, years later. Are there not 12 hours in the day? But those 12 hours were twelfths of whatever light the season gave. In midsummer, an hour ran long. In midwinter, it ran short. The hour was elastic. It stretched and shrank with the sun, and everyone simply lived inside that without ever once thinking it strange. And the day did not begin at dawn. It began at sunset, evening, and then morning, the first day. Which means that by the time anyone in this village opened their eyes, the day had already been underway for hours, in the dark, while they slept. The night had its own divisions: evening, midnight, cockcrow, morning. Nobody counted. You woke when the light and the animals told you to. Light, heat, work, and gathering. Not a clock, a current. And you cannot describe this village as a collection of buildings. You have to describe it as a collection of eyes. 200 to 400 people. Everyone is somebody's cousin. Everyone owes somebody. Everyone has watched everybody else be born, marry, fail, and bury a parent. In a settlement this size, there is no such thing as a private life, and the consequence is that a person is not simply themselves. A person is the sum of what the village has seen them do. So follow the day outward, ring by ring, and count the witnesses. It starts in the courtyard, and the courtyard is not private either. Houses here share it. The mill, the oven, the water jars, the animals at night, the loom, all of it is out in the open air between the walls, because the rooms themselves are dark, low-doored, small-windowed, and nobody with a choice works inside them. Which means that from the time a child in Nazareth can walk, that child is being watched by a woman on the other side of the courtyard who is not his mother, and who has been observing his family since before he was born. She knows what he is like when he is tired. She knows how he speaks to his mother. She will remember it for 40 years. Then the work. And here is where we have to be careful with a word. The neighbors in Mark's account call him Tekton. English Bibles almost always render that as carpenter, and the picture that forms is a man at a bench with wood shavings. The Greek is broader than that. A tekton is a builder, a craftsman who works in wood and in stone, and in a Galilean landscape made largely of stone, with a construction boom 4 miles over the hill, the stone is not incidental. Matthew's version of the same scene calls him the carpenter's son. So we have a trade, and we have a father who taught it. And a trade in this world was not taught in a school. It was taught by standing next to the man doing it for years, holding things, fetching things, ruining things, being corrected, until one day the work was yours. Which means the village did not just see a boy. The village saw an apprenticeship. They saw the hands get steadier. They watched a child become competent at something in public. over a decade, in the open. Let me stop the story here for a moment, because I want to ask you something, and I would rather ask it now than at the end. Is there a place where you are still 15 years old? Somewhere, a family, a hometown, an old circle of friends, where the people who love you most have already finished deciding what you are capable of, and nothing you have done since has been able to move that verdict an inch. Where you walk in the door as an adult and are handed back a version of yourself you outgrew 20 years ago. Most of us have a place like that. Some of us are still trying to get free of it. Tell me about yours in the comments. Not the details, if you would rather not. Just whether you know the feeling. I read them, and I think this one is going to matter more than usual for what is coming, because Nazareth is about to do exactly that to him. Keep walking outward. Past the courtyards, the paths run out to the terraced slopes, and in the season we have chosen, late spring, the month the Jewish calendar calls Iyar, the barley harvest, those slopes are full. The barley is being cut. Behind it, the wheat is still ripening. The winter rains are finished, and the heavy summer heat has not settled in yet. And for a few weeks, the entire village is outdoors and in motion at once. And at harvest, work has its own way of telling time. There is a parable Jesus tells later about a landowner who goes out early to hire laborers, and goes out again and again and again. The third hour, the 6th, the 9th, the 11th. Underneath the parable is an ordinary rural labor market, and the shape of the working day read off one brutal question. Who is still standing in the open, unhired? In a village this size, everybody could see who that was. And at the edge of every field, something is deliberately left standing. The law required it. When you reap your harvest, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge, and you shall not gather the gleanings. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. A generation of Israelites had heard the same command a second way. When you forget a sheaf in the field, do not go back for it. Think about what that produces in a village of 300 people. Charity here is not a decision anybody makes in private. It is not a donation. It is a shape in the landscape, a visible strip of uncut grain around the margin of every single field, which everyone can see from a distance, and into which anyone with nothing is entitled to walk. Which also means everyone can see who walks into it. That is the village as a living body, a place where mercy is built into the geometry of the ground, and where mercy is also completely public. This is the world that produced a man who would later say more about the poor than any teacher of his generation. He did not read about it. He harvested next to it every spring of his life. Keep going. The paths. Nobody in Nazareth travels alone within Nazareth, because there is nowhere far enough away. You pass people. You are greeted. You are asked about your mother. And on the doorframe of every house you pass, there is a mark, because the command in Deuteronomy was explicit. These words shall be on your heart, and you shall teach them to your children, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Recited morning and evening, fixed to the wood at the entrance of every home in the village, passed under 100 times a day by everyone, including him. Even the clothing carries a text. The command in Numbers was to make tassels on the corners of the garment, to look at them and remember. So the men of this village walked around with fringes at the 4 corners of their cloaks, swinging at the knee. Undyed wool, a belted tunic, an outer cloak that doubled as a blanket at night, sandals, a head covering against the sun. Nothing that suggested anything. Years later, in a crowd far from here, Sick people will push through a mob just to touch the fringe of his garment. Nazareth had watched that same fringe swing past its doorways for 30 years and thought nothing of it at all. And then the spring. This is the heart of the village, and I mean that structurally, not sentimentally. Nazareth had one perennial water source, a single spring on the north side of the settlement, known in much later tradition as Mary's Well, though that name is tradition and not evidence. One spring, for everyone, every day. Water is heavy. A full jar is a serious load, and the jars had to be filled more than once a day, and this was work done by women and girls. So the entire female population of the village converged, twice daily, at one point on the ground, which makes that spring the news exchange, the marriage market, and the courthouse of public reputation all at once. Every opinion Nazareth held about anybody was formed there, refined there, and repeated there. If people were saying something about the craftsman's family, about the missing father, about the mother, about the oldest son who had not married, the spring is where it was said. And there is a detail about wells here that is easy to miss. In John's account, far to the south, a woman comes to draw at the 6th hour, midday, the hottest and emptiest hour, and commentators have long read her timing as significant because the ordinary hours for water were early and late, when everyone came, which tells you something exact about Nazareth. The hour you fetched your water was legible. Come at the normal time, and you are part of the body. Come at noon, alone, and everyone knows why. That is the level of scrutiny we are talking about. Not hostile, just total. Last ring. The village gate, which in a settlement with no wall is less a gate than a threshold. The place where the path from outside arrives, and where the elders sat, and where anyone coming or going was seen. And then the light goes. It goes quickly here. The sun drops behind the western ridge, and the basin fills with a long amber, then blue. And work simply stops, because work is light, and there is no more of it. The last jars come up from the spring. The animals are brought in off the slopes and put on the lower level of the house, where their warmth rises through the floor. Somewhere a small clay lamp is lit. One wick, a thimble of olive oil, enough to eat by and not much more, because oil is money, and nobody here burns money for the pleasure of light. Then the flat roofs. In the warm months, people carry bedding up the outside stairs and sleep out under the sky, which means that on a spring night in Nazareth, half the village is lying on its roofs within earshot of the other half. And the mills are quiet. For the first time since before sunrise, that grinding you heard at the beginning of this has stopped everywhere at once. That is the ordinary day, and here is the part that should stay with you. By the time they closed their eyes, the next one had already begun. Evening, and then morning. In this village, the day starts in the dark while you are asleep, and the light only arrives to find work already waiting. Do that 400 times a year for 30 years, and you have almost the entire earthly life of Jesus of Nazareth. Once a year, though, the whole thing stopped, and the village emptied. Luke tells us that his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. That is roughly 65 miles on foot, 4 to 5 days each way, traveling in caravan through or around Samaria, because nobody made that journey alone if they could help it. And it is in the middle of that caravan that we get the single most revealing sentence anyone ever wrote about this village. Jesus is 12. The festival ends, the group starts home, and his parents do not know he is missing. Luke says they went a day's journey, a full day, supposing him to be in the group. And only then did they begin looking for him among their relatives and acquaintances. That is usually told as a story about a lost boy. It is not. It is a story about how this village traveled. A whole day passed before 2 attentive parents checked, and the reason is not negligence. The reason is that in a caravan from Nazareth, no child belonged to only one household. Every adult was provisionally responsible for every child, and nobody counted heads, because the group was the accounting. He was in the group. Of course he was in the group. Where else would he be? And look at the 2 categories Luke names when they finally search, among their relatives and their acquaintances. That is the whole social map of Nazareth in 4 words. Kin and everyone else, and in a village of 300, everyone else is a short list. That is the town where he grew up. Not a place he lived, a body he was inside of. There were children everywhere in it, and we know a little about what they did because he remembered it. Speaking as an adult, he compares his own generation to children sitting in the marketplaces, calling out to one another. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not mourn. That is a man recalling a game. The calling, the refusal to join in, the small tyrannies of a group of kids in an open space. He had played it. Somebody had refused to dance for him. And the prophet Zechariah, centuries earlier, had described what a restored and blessed city would look like. And it is not a temple or an army. It is old men and old women sitting in the streets with staffs in their hands for old age, and the streets of the city full of boys and girls playing in its streets. Which means the most ordinary image in this entire film, children shouting in the paths of an unimportant village, is not filler. It is what the prophet said the world would look like when God had put it right. Now, one absence. After the temple episode, when he is 12, Joseph never appears again in any gospel scene. Not once. And when the neighbors later list the family out loud, they name his mother and they name his brothers, James, Joseph, Judas, Simon, and the sisters who are, they say, here with us. But no father. Nearly all scholars read that as meaning Joseph died sometime before the public ministry. It is a strong inference, and it is not documented, and we cannot date it. But if it is right, then somewhere inside these ordinary years there was a day when the trade, the household, the debts, and the obligations all landed on the shoulders of the eldest son, in front of a village that watched it happen and adjusted its picture of him accordingly. The identity of those brothers and sisters is one of the oldest disputed questions in Christian history. Read as later children of Mary, as children of Joseph from an earlier marriage, or as close kin. The sources permit the argument and do not settle it, so neither will we. Which brings us to the last ordinary day. There was one. There has to have been. A specific morning, in a specific week, when he did the work for the last time, ate the last meal in that courtyard, walked out past the last doorpost and the last uncut edge of a barley field, and went south toward the Jordan and John. Nobody wrote it down. Not a line. We can be completely certain that it happened, and know absolutely nothing about what it contained. And then, some years later, he came back. Luke gives us the fullest version. He came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day. Now hold that word carefully. Synagogue in Greek means assembly, a gathering, not necessarily a building. And no first-century synagogue structure has ever been archaeologically confirmed at Nazareth. In a village of a few hundred, the assembly plausibly met in a large house or a courtyard. So do not picture a hall. Picture a room full of people who have known this man his entire life, sitting close enough to touch him. The scroll of the prophet Isaiah is handed to him. He unrolls it, finds the place, and reads, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor." Then he rolls it up, gives it back to the attendant, and sits down. Luke says the eyes of everyone in the assembly were fixed on him. And he says, "Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." Now, read the room's first reaction, because it is not what you expect. All spoke well of him and marveled at the gracious words that were coming from his mouth. They liked it. For one moment, the village is proud, and in the same breath, "Is not this Joseph's son?" That question is the hinge of his entire life in this town, and it turns both ways. It starts as a compliment. "Our boy, one of ours, look at him." And within seconds it becomes the accusation. Because if he is Joseph's son, then we know him. We know his mother, his brothers, his sisters, his hands, his ordinary years. And what we know cannot possibly contain what he just said about himself. Mark's version of the same encounter is blunter, and it reads like a village reciting its own census. "Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And Mark adds the line that should stop us cold. "They took offense at him, and he could do no mighty work there. And he marveled because of their unbelief." He marveled. The word mark uses for astonishment. The same reaction crowds had to him, he had to Nazareth. And then Luke gives us the village's grievance in its own words. And it is not a theological objection at all. It is territorial. Doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, "Physician, heal yourself. What we have heard you did at Capernaum, do here also." There it is. You helped strangers before you helped us. That is not a question about his identity. That is a claim of prior ownership. We fed you. We watched you. We were here for 30 years. Whatever you have become, we have first rights to it. And when he refuses that claim, when he reminds them that Elijah was sent to a widow in Sidon and Elisha healed a Syrian, that the prophets of Israel were repeatedly sent past Israel, the room turns. Luke says they rose up, drove him out of the town, and brought him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, in order to throw him down the cliff. The people from the courtyard, from the spring, from the caravan where they had all assumed he was in the group. He passed through their midst and went away. And that is the end of Nazareth in the story. Matthew records the consequence in a single flat sentence. Leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum by the sea. He moved. He made his home in a fishing town on the lake, and the village that had watched him grow up disappears almost entirely from the record from that point forward. Even his own brothers, we are told, did not believe in him. Not then. That came later, and at terrible cost. And it is a different story. Now step back and look at what the prophets had already said about a man like this. Isaiah, 7 centuries before, described the servant of God this way. He grew up before him like a young shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men. Set that against what we have just walked through, and it stops being poetry. It is a description of exactly this: growth in dry, unremarkable ground, in a place with nothing to recommend it, ending in rejection by the people closest to him. The prophecy did not merely predict a death, it predicted a hometown. There is also a much debated line in Matthew that he went and lived in a town called Nazareth, so that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he would be called a Nazarene. And no such sentence exists anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. Scholars have proposed several explanations. One is a play on the Hebrew word Netzer, meaning a shoot or a branch, from Isaiah's line, "There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit, Netzer and Nazareth. Another reads it against the Nazir, the Nazarite vow. Another takes it as a summary of the prophet's broader theme of a despised deliverer. I am not going to tell you which is correct. The honest answer is that we do not know. But notice which prophetic image keeps returning. A shoot, a branch, a root in dry ground. The vocabulary that the prophets reached for over and over when they described the coming king was not the vocabulary of thrones. It was the vocabulary of agriculture, of something small pushing up out of hard, poor soil, slowly, unnoticed, in a place nobody was watching, which is, quite precisely, what happened on a limestone ridge in Galilee for 30 years. And Isaiah had said something else about this region, which Matthew quotes when the ministry begins. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, Galilee of the nations. The people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light. The despised north, named centuries in advance as the place where the light would come up. The people of Nazareth were not villains. That is the part that unsettles me, and I think it should unsettle you. They were not cruel, and they were not stupid. They were people who had more information about Jesus of Nazareth than any group of human beings who have ever lived. 3 decades of watching him work, eat, walk the paths, keep the Sabbath, carry a load, grieve a father, live a completely ordinary life in full view. And that information is exactly what made them unable to see him. Familiarity did what hostility could not. The most dangerous thing you can do to a person is to know them so well and so early that you stop being able to notice who they are becoming. Which leaves a question that cuts both directions. Who have you already finished deciding about? A parent, a sibling, someone you grew up with, someone who has been trying for years to show you they are not who they were. And every time they try, some part of you says quietly, "Is not this the carpenter? I know exactly what you are." And the harder direction. Who has finished deciding about you? How much of your own life have you spent smaller than you are, because a room full of people who love you handed you a verdict when you were 15, and you have been carrying it ever since? Those 30 years were not a waiting room. We tend to read them as a delay, the long, boring part before the real part starts. But if the Gospels are telling the truth about who he was, then the flower, the fringe on the cloak, the uncut edge of the barley, the walk to the spring, the ordinary Tuesday in an unimportant village, all of that was not preparation for a holy life. It was the holy life, 9/10 of it, chosen and lived out in full, in a place too small for anyone to write down. Which means the ordinary day you are living right now, the work, the water, the walk to it, the people who think they already know you, is not the part before your life starts. If someone came to mind while you were listening, somebody you have already decided about, or somebody who has decided about you, send them this. Sometimes that is the whole conversation, and it does not need words from you. And if you want to keep walking through this world with me, the roads, the villages, the years the Gospels pass over in a single line, subscribe, and come with me on the next one. There is a great deal of first-century ground still to cover. One last question before you go, and I would like to hear the answer. If you had lived in that village, if you had ground the barley beside his mother and watched that boy grow up in your courtyard, do you think you would have believed him? Be honest, I will be reading.